afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this workshop. So today our speaker is Jose Medina, and this session's on reaching Japanese by renewing our mind. So a little bit about Jose and Miki. They met in Tokyo, Japan in 2012. Jose was serving as a missionary with the International Mission Board, IMB. They both did ministry together and helped missions teams serving Japan, were active in a local church plant, and held Bible studies weekly. After getting married in 2015, Miki moved to San Antonio, Texas. They both still felt a calling to minister to Japanese in Texas. In time, Miki started a moms group that met monthly. Now Jose and Miki will be working together to reach Japanese in San Antonio with second level ministry as Japanese community outreach coordinators.
All right, thank you. So my name's Jose or Jose. I'm going to give yourself a little bit about me, right? Because kind of matters because you know where I'm coming from, how I'm thinking, who I am. So these is kind of like the SparkNote version of who I am. So I studied history and Spanish, right? That was my bachelor's degree. After I graduated, I went and was a missionary in Japan. Guess who I met in Japan at the airport? Any guesses? Mickey. I met my wife. She had the sign saying, "Yokoso, welcome." She was like my, you know how like Moses would babble, right? And Aaron would help him out. That was kind of what it was, right? I was babbling in my Japanese and she was my translator. And so yeah, lo and behold, we got married. We helped plant a church there. We did a lot of campus ministry. This was from 2012 to 2014. And then we moved here in 2015, or Mickey rather did. I moved back a year before, and then she came a year after. She's from Saitama, it's kind of north of Tokyo. We have 2 kids. It's the one that was super loud, that was crying. He's young, he's 16 months. And we have Monica, who's 3.5. And currently we're reaching Japanese in the San Antonio community in Texas. So that's like South Central Texas. We're closer to Mexico than we are getting outside of Texas, to be quite honest. Mexico is about 3 hours away. And so what we're doing is we're doing English exchange moms groups and soccer ministry and much more. We're part-time with second level. My full-time job is I'm a special ed teacher. And so that's what I do. But before we got with second level, we were already doing this. So this is something that we were already doing that we felt called and led to do regardless of if we ever met second level or not. And so we just felt really called to meet Japanese, and people are like, well, San Antonio, are there a lot of Japanese in San Antonio? It's about 2,000 Japanese. 3 sources that bring Japanese to San Antonio is the Toyota plant, military base. A lot of them get married in Okinawa and then they come over, and usually the husband is a serviceman. So we tap into that. And then the third I would call is miscellaneous. It's like students coming to study for this or getting a job doing this. So it's kind of like this random box. But those are our 3 sources in which we really tap into. So our ministry looks like family, right? A lot of family. And so I do a soccer ministry Sunday morning with the guys. It's growing a lot. It's been really tough in the sense because it's Sunday morning, but I really felt led by God to, you need to be there for these guys. And I still go to church, I just find a different time to go. And so we meet every Sunday morning for soccer ministry, and they're starting to open up. And they're starting to I'm starting to see growth, and so I'll be absent this Sunday, and they notice. So that means that they care about me. And so that's just a little bit about me. If you want to talk after, I love to talk. Not necessarily about myself, but if you have any questions, this is kind of me. A little tidbit, my parents are not from the US. My dad's from Mexico, my mom's from Panama. So I just grew up traveling a lot, just being in a lot of different cultures, being a bicultural kid, growing up speaking Spanish and obviously English, but Spanish was my first language until about 5th grade. And so yeah, so in a sense I can really relate to some of the Japanese that are here trying to toggle between the 2 languages. And so now the main reason why we're here is we're going to talk about how we renew our minds and how that is relevant to culture. So the first thing we're going to do is pull out your Bible, pull out your phone, and I'd like for you to go to Romans 12, 1 through 8. This is going to be kind of our foundation for this workshop. And then to give you a little bit of a kind of insight, we're going to go 30 minutes of me blabbing. I don't like to blab for an hour because I'm not that interesting. And then we're going to go 20 minutes group discussion where I have specific questions about the material that I'm going to be going over that you guys can talk amongst yourselves in groups. And the last minutes will be like Q&A or whatever. Or if you want to peace out, that's also fine. So go ahead and read. I'm going to give you a few minutes. I don't like to reread something. I'd rather you read it to yourself and see what the Holy Spirit does to you, or if anything sparks something. So go ahead and read Romans 12, 1 through 8 very quickly for me if you do have access to a Bible or your phone. And I'll give you like, I'd say 2-3 minutes. I know this is a kind of a very familiar passage to many. I'll do what I do in the class. Thumbs up when you're done, okay? So I know. So I don't interrupt your reading. All right, so I see almost everyone's looking at me, so I'll go ahead. So when my uni asked me to do a workshop, I was kind of banging my head like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Because I had done one a couple times that was not famous, but it was kind of like a beginner's guide to how to do Japanese ministry in your local community. So I started thinking, I had 6 weeks to myself. My wife and my 2 kids went to Japan finally and visited. I had to stay, obviously, to work. So I had a lot of time to think. Plus, my floors were being redone in my house, so it was mass chaos, and I kind of stumbled on this book that I just started reading about, Romans 12. I was like, okay, let me think about this. So I'm going to break down Romans 12, and then we're going to get into the nitty-gritty about culture and all that stuff, all right? So present ourselves as a living sacrifice. God calls us to make a choice about the way we want to live. He wants you, not your work, right? So keep in mind and have the mindset of how am I going to be doing ministry. So the most efficient way we can do ministry is by God being the person that transforms us. One thing I want you to realize is if you don't allow God to transform you, you start transferring what you think is best, and that's not good, right? We want God to be transforming us, and then through that, we transfer all that, right? But if we are like, God, I got it, it's all good, right? We start transferring things that we think are okay, that we think are good, and that will get us into trouble. Renewing our mind, accepting and knowing that we need Jesus. We can't do it alone, right? So renewing the mind is an act of humility. Humility is saying actively, I cannot do this by myself. I need help, right? Whether it be the Lord, brothers and sisters in Christ, using the body, it is an acknowledgement that I can't do this. I don't have all the knowledge. I don't have all the energy. I need the Lord to intercede so that I can be at my best to reach people. All right, and so I went on to say we're called to be humble and not to think too highly. This connects to Philippians 2, if we're very familiar about imitating Christ's humility. And in the verse it says, consider the interest of others more important than your own. So when you enter ministry, your prerogative is their interest, not yours. And if it's the other way around, you need to reassess, right? And that's what humility, true humility, is about. And if we go further down into Philippians 2, it goes on to say that the Lord sent his Son down into human form. That in itself is an act of humility, right? God going into human form, sending his Son down? It's like, whoa, dying on the cross. So again, the ultimate act of humility, the ultimate example. And then we go to verse 4, unity and diversity in the body of Christ. The Lord understands Japanese. He understands Farsi. He understands whatever language you want to insert in there. And that's really what we want to convey when we're dealing with people in an intercultural way, right? When I was in Japan, they're like, oh, well, Jesus is for the Westerners. And it's like, well, predominantly you see a lot of churches and stuff there, but Jesus speaks Japanese. He understands. He knows exactly where you're at. And so we need to find a way culturally, socially, right? In a sensitive way, of course, to be like, Jesus is for you. He knows, like, you know? And so that's another thing to consider in this passage. And then lastly, we all got gifts. They're not all the same. And I think the thing I want to focus on the most is God chooses to give them. It is not by our own merit, by our own ability that we have them. God gives it to us, and we need to use it, right? We don't want to be Jonah, kind of like really missing the point here, right? Because eventually Jonah ended up going to Nineveh anyways, right? Even though he was in the big whale or big fish or whatever. And so the point being is we want to present ourselves as a living sacrifice. That is a daily thing. Renewing your mind, a daily thing. People use the verse, well, pick up your cross. What does that imply? That you dropped it. That's what it implies. That you've dropped it. And that you need Jesus in order to pick that up, right? You can't do it on your own. And if you try, well, you know, I don't want to say it's futile, but, you know, maybe it is. But you're going to be pushing a lot. And then the other thing is the humility part. Philippians 2, imitating Christ's humility, is a chapter that changed my life. And it shows the examples, I think it goes 1 through 11. And then unity and diversity. A lot of people think, oh, Jesus is for this certain person. No, 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 no. It's not. It's not. Jesus knows all the languages. He can reach people from all different types of cultures. He knows you more than you know yourself. And we need to find a way to convey that. And then lastly, we all have gifts. Don't sit on the sideline. Don't be, oh, woe is me, or I don't know this, or don't get stuck. You have a gift. Use it. But be reminded that that gift was given to you. It was chosen by God, right? It wasn't because, oh, this or that, you know, and we're going to go more into how this kind of works. But I really want to set up for the foundation for how we look at culture and Japanese culture and all that. So I'm going to move on. Okay? So ways to see culture. So the first one I will call the academic way. What you might see in some academic book in college. Read the definition. I'm not going to read it to you because I hate when people do that. All right? So that's the academic version that I found that I liked. All right? I'm doing 3 different ways because I know that a lot of people think differently. Come on in if you're going to jump. And then the second one is I like to call the river. So if you think of a river, you have the surface and you have the deeper level. So when I ask you, what do you know about Japanese? You're going to be like sushi and ramen and anime. That's the surface level of culturally Japanese. And there's nothing wrong with that. But there's also a deeper level, right? And it goes the same thing with the iceberg, right? Where they say you only see 10% of the iceberg. It's very much the same thing. But I like the river one because it's constantly moving. Culture is always changing, right? And so that's one way. And then perhaps the millennial way, culture is like the script and actor follows. So again, just ways to see culture. Not one is better than the other. However, whatever strikes your fancy, and I just try to have it from 3 different ways. The academic, perhaps the nature, and perhaps the more, I don't know, millennial, lack of a better word. All right, so these are just different ways to see culture. Culture affects us in all different ways. We're byproducts of culture, right? It informs the way we think, how we react, right? With all these things, right? The biological, physical, and social, right? Everything. So just ways to see culture. Now, we're going to use kind of this diagram. And sorry for the picture. I thought I had a better one. I thought I saved it on my computer, but I didn't. So this is the dimensions of culture. This is from Perspectives class that I took a couple years back. I dusted it off. I'm like, whoa, this is really good. So we have experiences. I'm going to use myself as an example. Jose, parents from Panama, from Mexico. That informed the way that I saw these things, feelings, beliefs, values, right? And the fact that I was born in the United States, that also, right, contributes to that. And so see this as a filter, right? And so beliefs, feelings, and values develop the worldview. And through that, you make decisions. And then through that, you see how people actually react or follow through on those decisions. So a lot of times, when we're dealing with culture, we don't see it as a decision-making process. That's exactly what it is. We're making active decisions on how to act. Here's an example. When I was in Japan, first couple weeks I was there, I was at a Bible study, and it was in English because most of the Japanese knew the English, and so we're going through the scripture, we're reading, and then it got really quiet. And it was really uncomfortable for me as an American. So what do you think I did? I tried to interrupt the silence. But what I didn't know was Japanese were thinking. They were thinking about the text, right? I wasn't allowing them to think about the text. I was interrupting the thought process because my American way of seeing things like, oh, it can't be quiet. I gotta say something funny or sarcastic or let's move on to something else, right? And that interrupted it, but that's culture. That's culture. And granted, there are some Americans that they would be happy with the silence, but generally speaking, right? We're not used to the same amount of silence that a Japanese person may be. Or perhaps I missed something, right? And so again, that is just an example of experience informing our beliefs, feelings, and values. And granted, this can change, no doubt. But this is just a little diagram that I'm using that I like a lot that helps us understand the dynamics or the dimensions of culture. Right? Okay, so think about your own life. How did you grow up? How do you see the world? Right? How does that inform the way that you go about the world? Or how you go about your daily life? And so again, remember, culture is a decision-making process. And yes, it's evolving, but it requires decision-making. Whether that be with your beliefs, your feelings, or your values. When I was 9, I don't think the same way I do now as a 34-year-old guy, right? Because I've lived a life, right? It informs all these different things. I see things differently. So it's very much like that. And so I like this a lot because it gives us an idea, not just for Japanese, but for all of us, because we all have culture, right? We all have things that we cherish or, we have hang-ups too in our own culture. So that was one thing that I liked a lot. So now we're going to talk about Japanese culture. So when you look at this, I want you to think of this right here, okay? So, Japanese culture, and again, this is not a complete list. I know there's a lot more, totally know, right? I'm married to one, I know, trust me. So, group mentality, right? Americans, we tend to be very individual. Oh, you want pizza? I'm getting Mexican. Okay, whatever. It's not a big deal, right? We just whatever. The next thing is avoiding, disrupting the harmony. So, if we're talking about something, and something's nagging me. I'm going, wait a minute, I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know if that sits well with me, right? That is a big no-no in Japanese culture. They try to avoid that like the plague. All right? So, and so that's really, really important to know when you're dealing with a group. Again, mentality or mindset. The next one is predominantly homogeneous population. Japan is mostly Japanese. Yes, there's foreigners that live there. I used to be one. But compared to the United States or Western Europe or even other places, there's not a lot of cultures. My wife didn't meet her first foreigner till she was 12. Do you think that has any kind of influence in her life? I think so. Right? Predominantly homogeneous population. So it's used to dealing with a lot of the same people, with the same culture, with the same values and feelings. Whereas in the United States, we don't all have that, right? We're dealing with all different types of languages and approaches, right? Next one is very formal. Japanese are very formal, right? With the bowing, right? There's no hugging, right? There's nothing like that. I mean, you can once you get to know them, but yeah, don't go right in for the hug. That will really, that will scare them a little bit sometimes. And so, even in the business way, it's very formal. Very, very formal. They actually have a special way of talking to people. It's called keigo. And it's a way that they talk to their boss, their superior, someone of great importance. All right? And so my wife always tells me it can be kind of exhausting because I'm kind of toggling between who I need to be polite to and who I can just be, a little bit, kind of loose with, right? And then shame-based culture. And I think this is probably the one that most people know of, right? And so keep in mind, the samurai is something that a lot of people know about. They have this thing called Bushido Code. And I think the thing that a lot of Americans always latch onto is death before dishonor. Shame-based culture. Think about that. Samurai had a really strong influence in Japanese, and something little like that still permeates. Obviously, it's not as drastic, but it's still there, right? And that's why Japanese sometimes wallow, and it's like it's not like they don't know what to do. It's just like they can't get over the fact that they don't want to shame someone. They don't want to inconvenience. They don't want to wrong someone, and so that's why they are always polite. That's why there are all these different things, and so it's kind of connected. Senpai culture. I call this vertical leadership. So if you have a boss up here or the pastor, whatever he says, he does. There's no arguing. Whereas in American culture, there's some differences. We call it horizontal. So if I have a principal and I have an issue, I can go to him or her, talk about it, and have a conversation. Whereas in Japanese culture, whatever they say, it goes. You do not question, you do not challenge, you don't do anything like that. Whereas if you have horizontal, where it tends to be more relational, where if you have a pastor, and yes, pastor does have ultimate say, but you can at least have a conversation, and they're open. And also, the way that we refer to people. Most pastors don't want to be called Pastor Bob, they want to be called Bob, right? Because it makes them more approachable, right? And so in Japanese, it's always, something san, right? Never call them by their first name, it's always the last name. But, as a gaijin or foreigner, sometimes I have a bonus and I can call them by their first name, right? But again, it's just that very different type of leadership. And then the last one is Buddhist country. Obviously, they have Shinto. I would even say they're more humanist, right, or more atheist now. But the reason why this really matters is Buddhism is it a religion of one God or many gods? Many, right? So that matters when you're trying to minister to them. Because if we're talking about one God in Christianity, right? And they're dealing with I think it's polytheistic, right? Mm-hmm. Polytheistic religion. That's really hard to get there. Think about that. They grew up their whole lives, even if they don't necessarily believe it, but they're going through the customs, the traditions, their families partaking in it. And it's many gods, representing many things, where we're talking about just one God. That's tough. That's, and again, that's the perspective of knowing, I need to step back. What does that mean, right? And so these are just some of the things. There's way more that I could talk about, that I've read about, but these are the ones that I see as like the most kind of in your face and more. And the other thing is with the homogeneous population, to me, this really hits me because my kids are half. Just to be quite honest, right? And my kids just got back, and my wife was just talking about how like everyone thought they were so cute and everything else. So, things are changing, but again, it's just that experience, that mindset, the position you're in. So now we're going to talk about 3 things that I think are important to consider when we're talking about how we renew our mind, consider the culture, and now how do we present the gospel, right? So the first step, obviously, is to renew, is to trust the Lord, to be like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, help me. So the first thing is we always have a constant battle between kingdom culture, which is Christ culture, versus the world or our own culture, right? I always tease people, how many books are there in the Bible? Anyone know?
66.
I always say 67, right? Because we always make up our own book, right? Right? And so, even though we shouldn't. And so, these are some of the things that I think are really important when we're thinking and considering kingdom culture versus world culture, is knowing that the gospel is always at work. That it isn't reliant on us. We're not Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible Saving the Day. Jesus already did that. So, get over it. Right? We must understand that renewing our mind is a constant thing. It's ongoing. And then we must understand that when we have a kingdom mindset, it permeates everything. How I treat my wife, how I treat my kids, how I treat my coworkers, strangers, right? And then the last thing is what hits. How do we know what we know? It's because we observe. Obviously, there's other ways to learn. But Japanese are very observant people. And so we need to be mindful about that. When we're reaching people, are we actually being a good example in our own lives? Right? Because that's going to eventually rear its ugly head if we're not. And it's going to hurt our witness. Right? And they're going to be like, ooh, I don't know about Jesus because Jose's, he's talking crazy over here or whatever. Right? So that's really important to understand that they're watching. They may not be saying anything or talking to you, but they're watching. Right? And I think that's the one that hit me the most. So kingdom culture versus world culture. There's always that constant battle. And I'm not here to say that you shouldn't embrace your own culture, but it should not supersede kingdom culture. Our job here is to spread the gospel, to extend God's kingdom. Because is this world eternal, the one that we're living in now? No, it is not. So it's really important to have that mindset. And yes, that's heavy. That's super heavy. I get that. But it's really important to understand that those two things toggle and they're battling. And a lot of times the world culture has a really strong grip on people. All right? First point. Second, relationship matters in any culture. It doesn't look the same, but it matters. So I'm going to use John 15. Obviously, this is related to second level. I know that everyone's very familiar with John 15, but really I'm looking at verse 5. I am the vine. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Pretty simple. You can try to do it by yourself, but you're going to make a mess. I've tried it before, trust me, and it wasn't pretty. Okay? And so I like this too. Jesus instructs the disciples in the relationship to him, each other, and the world. He promises the Holy Spirit. And then lastly, leverage your influence you have for the gospel. Every single person has influence in this room. You may not think it, but you do. So leverage that. And I don't mean that, I know people are like, ooh, leverage, bad word. No, you're using that so that you can find ways, whether it be in your circle, your family, the Japanese you're reaching, whoever, to show love to them so that they can get closer to Christ. Leverage that. There's nothing wrong with that. Right? And then lastly, you cannot be in relationship with Jesus and not be on mission. Just keep that in mind. If you're choosing Jesus, you're on mission for him. And then the last one, the one I like the best. Seed is greater than the potted plant. All right? So I want you to read that top one. It says, do not bring us the gospel as a potted plant. Bring us the seed of the gospel and plant it in our soil. Our job is not to manufacture what we do here to another country. That's not our job as missionaries. That's not our job even here. It's to understand the cultural boundaries, the social boundaries, and find a way to plant the seed. Our job is not to see the entirety of the finished product. That's not our job. Although we may want to see it, and we have a desire to see it, that's not our job. Our job is to be obedient and plant the seed. And this is why the seed is greater than the potted plant. Because if I give you a potted plant now, I would have made it in my own way. And that may not jive with you. So we need to just bring the seed of the gospel and allow it to grow the way that Japanese see fit. Because church, life group, whatever you want to call it, Bible ain't going to look the same. And that's okay. As long as Jesus is in it and it's about him, let them do what they need to do. But a lot of times as Americans, and I speak from experience, we want to bring what we know over there, and it doesn't work. Because we're really bringing what we think is best and not really the gospel. Keep it simple. Just bring the seed. Be obedient. And lastly, the gospel is far greater and compelling than anything we can offer. You could be the greatest speaker, you could have a seminary degree, you could be super smart, but it doesn't beat the gospel. And really, you're robbing people if you're not sharing it, to be quite honest. So again, to go back, we have the kingdom versus the world, right? Culture, that constant battle. Second, relationship matter in any culture you go to. It don't matter. It will look different, but it matters. And lastly, bring the seed, not the potted plant. Don't waste your time with the potted plant. Bring the seed, be obedient, plant it, let them do the work. Be in the background. So now, at this point, I'm going to have us break up into groups, and I have a little bit of some group discussions because I don't want to blab the whole time because I know I can. And so we're going to talk for about 15 minutes in group discussions. I'm going to kind of go over these questions real quickly. So what does it mean to be a living sacrifice, right? We talked a little bit about that, but what does that mean for you in your Japanese ministry, in your daily life, however you want to address that? What are ways that we can daily renew our minds? One would say, well, devotional. Okay, sure, but let's go beyond that. What does it look like to plant the seed and not the entire plant? What does that look like? How does the Japanese point of view culture change how we approach our outreach to Japanese? So think about some of the things, and you can ask me to switch slides. I'm happy to do that. And lastly, how can we separate kingdom culture and our own culture? Because those are always competing, right? And so what we're going to do is we have a nice solid 8 people in here. So we'll have 4 right here and 4 here. And just go ahead and go through these discussions and talk about it. And share whether it be with your ministry, your daily lives, however you want to discuss. I'll give you about 15 minutes and then we'll come back, okay? Thank you.
I guess we're right.
4:30, we gotta, is it 4:30? Yeah.
Great.
So, almost 4:30. So before we move on, questions, anything like that? If not, I'm not offended. I know a lot of what I went over is not earth-shattering. It is more just understanding that we need to be renewing and sacrificing ourselves in order for our ministries to see true growth and to really meet people where they're at. And I heard someone say Japanese are very relational. They are. And I would say most cultures outside the United States are very relational. Us Americans are the ones that tend not to be very. And so relationship matters in any culture. It just looks different. All right? And so before we go, and I'll answer questions, because I'm cheesy, I bought everyone seeds. So you're going to take seeds home. You're going to plant it, and you're going to remind yourself, although the irony is you're putting it in a potted plant probably with soil, right? So whatever. But the idea is the seed, not the potted plant. Okay? And I did sunflower because it's in season. So I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, shoot away. Welcome. For like 6 years. We've seen 2 people come to know the Lord, baptized and everything. It's mostly ladies because the guys are a harder egg to crack. But sorry, allergies. 2 that have come to like been baptized everything, and then my wife has Bible studies that she does, and then I do soccer ministry, and they're starting to ask questions. It's again it's about being there, and it's kind of what I call the ministry of being present, right? And so it takes time. Like there's times where I was really discouraged. I'm like, what am I doing? But now they're starting to really show up, and I think it also helps that people. What I always tell people that want to reach Japanese is let them ask the questions. Don't tell them, right? If they're curious, that gives you the license to say what you need to say, right? So it's like, why are you here? How did you meet Mickey? All those things, like then, I can explain my story, right, of how we met, and that's going to have Jesus in it, and they're not going to be offended by that, or they're not going to feel like I'm pushing. And so allow them to ask the questions, kind of allow them to, have kind of dictate the terms. And then the other thing I always tell people is meet in a neutral spot, because I think a lot of times church can be very overwhelming for Japanese, right? And yes, there are moments where you can have them come, like if you have a cool event, but it's really having that relationship so that you can get to that point where you can ask that, or they feel comfortable enough that you're not going to, you know what I mean? That you're trying to trick them or, anything like that. And so it's really about reading the air. And so, so that's what we've done. So 2 ladies, but a lot of people asking questions. My wife is really good about knowing when and how. And I'll give you an example. When I was in Japan, there was this guy I was ministering to, college guy, and he was running late to our group. And we made kare, curry, and we didn't have enough for him. So I was like, we'll keep the bowl there for him, and I won't eat. I'll just go to Kobini after and get something. And my wife was like, no. If you do that, he's going to feel really bad, and it's going to dictate everything. So we're going to wait, and you're going to eat half of it. And so literally we're just waiting and everything. And so that little thing, though, mattered, and that's culture. Me and the Americans like, oh, it's all good. It's all good. I'll get something for myself, right? And people keep eating, right? It's like, whatever, Jose's got it. But in Japanese culture, that matters. Because he's going to feel like, oh, because I was late, Jose-san didn't get to eat. And da-da-da-da. And it goes from there to there to there. And so it's just understanding those little things. Those little things actually matter. That for an American person, like, well, it's not a huge deal, but it's a huge deal to them, and that's who you're trying to reach, so it needs to be a huge deal for you. So just little things like that. And so yeah, we've been doing it for 6 years. We recently started an English ministry, and that's doing really well. And we actually meet at a 2-story house that the first floor has been converted into a coffee shop. And they let it use it for free. And they have like coffee and everything. It has like the coffee vibe with the free Wi-Fi sign here and the cool like bar style table stuff going on. It was cool. So we've been really good, and God's just been really moving, and yeah, in San Antonio out of all places. Yeah, thank you. Yes, sir.
When you said you were meeting with these guys on Sunday morning, that itself is kind of like wait, you can't do something other than church like on Sunday morning, And I'm not sure that's like an American thing,
Right.
but there have been guys that have done, they've done softball, like Japanese guys, Japanese only, and part of me has wanted to join them, but it's like, oh, I can't do that because I've got church or something.
Yeah.
But it's like, at some point, like, do I let go of?
Right. So that's
I could go to church at any.
That's what I battled with, right? Because I wanted to go to church, but someone said, he's like, Jose, if you really want to get to know the guys, you got to be there, right? And so I'll go on Saturday night or once a month, like for Father's Day, I was like, I'm going to church, and they were like, yeah, we're busy anyway, so we didn't do it that day. So like a lot of holiday type stuff, I'll be at church anyways. But I found that because I went consistently, it has helped my relationship with them. They're inviting me, they're opening up, because if I'm just coming so often, I'm a tourist. I'm a tourist to the group. I'm not someone that's invested. And so yeah, so I had to make that decision. And while I'm doing that, my wife has now invited other moms that are married to those soccer players, and they play at the playground right next to us. So it's kind of working out where I'm playing soccer with the guys, and then they're playing on the playground while we're doing that. And now it's become like a full-blown thing where if we're not there, like, where's Jose? Where's Miki? And so that was kind of the turning point. Was like, I told myself that I'm like, yeah, there's church on other days, but I was like, if I really want to be committed to this and to really see growth and to really engage the Japanese guys, this is the best time for them. So it has to be the best time for me because they're working, they're notorious for their long work hours. So yeah, so that's what I had to do, and I've seen growth, and a lot of guys are showing up, and I'm finally in the chat room with them where it's all in Japanese in the line room, so I'm in. But that was because I made an investment, of, okay, I need to reorient my schedule. Got to sacrifice some stuff. Wake up early because we meet at 8 a.m., sometimes earlier because it gets really hot in Texas, and we play soccer. And it matters when I show up. Like, it's just one of those things where it's like, oh, he's here, and so it just matters. And so that's one of those things where I wanted to reach guys because we had a lot of ladies that we were reaching, and I just had to take that step. And I've seen a lot of growth, a lot of fruit. So, anything else? Anyone else?
How do you deal with, or maybe you never received backlash for how dare you skip church?
Actually, our church is very supportive of it,
Great.
and they understand it, and I think, there will be a time where it will transition, but I realize that a lot of these guys are starting to open up, and it takes time, and so I have to invest that time. And they also know I'm missing church. They're very aware that I'm missing church to be with them, and that matters to them. And so that in itself is a ministry right there. It's like, whoa. And in a weird way, I find, not that I can replace playing soccer with going to church, but I find that God's really been working in me while I'm there, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean? Although I'm not with believers, it's just my wife and I just feel I don't know, I feel at peace, you know? And so, yeah, and we're still working that out where we'll go Saturday, but then, you know, like this past Sunday we went, and so kind of working that out, but that ministry's really blown up, and so we're trying to figure out what to do. But yeah, for anyone that's trying, I would say you gotta, you know, make that sacrifice and then kind of figure it out, and I don't know. So yeah, it's been interesting, but in a weird way, I find that I need to be there Sunday mornings because now they're starting to ask questions and they're like, hey, I want you to do this or that, or what does it mean? Like the other day they said, like, why do you go to church? Well, let me tell you, it's like if I'm sitting in church, I can't answer that question, you know what I mean? Because I played soccer, you know, in between games. And so it's just those little things that add up to any, you know, to bigger things. So.
It also means it's not the rules, it's not the ritual of going
Correct.
to church, it's the person.
Well, and I told them that, like, there's church on Saturday night and Sunday night, and some people do Wednesday, and they're like, what? It's not just Sunday? And I'm like, no, and so it's just funny, because that's their reason not to go. And I tease them, well, you know, we can call this, you know, the church of soccer, and we'll just go from there. Because I like soccer a lot. So yeah, but God's really been using that ministry, and then Mickey was smart and was like, you know what? I'll just start inviting ladies to the playground, and it became a thing. And then those ladies are being invited to church by Mickey, like if we have an ACON or things like that, and then they're showing up, and then the husbands show up. And so that's what we're doing is like we're building that trust, so that when it gets to a moment to say, hey, we have this event at church, they come, they listen to the sermon, we make them feel as comfortable as possible, you know, whatever we need to do. Mickey's real sweet. She'll have like Japanese Bibles ready to go for them and stuff, so they can look through the scripture and all that. And then they partake, and we allow the Holy Spirit to do what it needs to do, right? We don't intrude, we don't push, anything like that. If you have any questions, we're here. So we're very, I don't want to say we're like hands off or we're hiding it. We just don't want them. I guess at the end of the day, I always tell them, I'm going to be your friend regardless if you believe in Jesus or not. I'm going to love you. So that's my job. So anyone else before we move on to the next session or the whatever the meeting? Please reach out. I have second level business cards if you want one. They're somewhere here, but I can. Please reach out. We're in San Antonio. You have any questions about local ministry? I do have another big PowerPoint where I do stuff like on local ministry and what we did, because we are the only ones really doing what we're doing in San Antonio. We built it from the ground up to the point now that we have access to over 100 families in the San Antonio area. So, sorry. Yeah. So, anyways, thank you guys. Oh, is everyone back? Oh, man, he's interrupting me. No one's back yet. That's not. So yeah, if you have any questions, I reach Japanese in Japan. That's a different beast. It's a different one when you're reaching them here. They tend to be more open here. Use what you have, right? Like the city, like, you know, just having events and things like that. You know, if you want to go more into detail, I'm happy to do that. But we started from the ground, like of nothing, right? Of just us, like we want to reach Japanese. And now it's getting to the point where, you know, there's a lot of churches interested in offering us certain things. So it's great. And so we'll see what God has. And, you know, I think if you're called to do something, God will sustain you. So pretty simple. So anyways, that's it. Thanks, guys, for your time.